Today's question comes from Jonathan Brown, who says, "Hi, my brother recently passed away, but because of this I've been wondering if heaven is real. I remember at one point where I had a close call of my own during my childhood, but I remember my mom told me I was clinically dead at one point. But I remember there was nothing, no pearly gates, no one welcoming me home, no sound or anything, just empty blackness. Since then I've always questioned it, even though I considered myself a highly spiritual person. Even though I stopped going to church, mostly because my old church had certain views I didn't care for, and I felt God didn't want me in that kind of setting." Well, Jonathan, firstly, let me say my deepest condolences about your brother. You can know firsthand that Jesus himself wept when he was at the tomb of his best friend Lazarus. And even though just a handful of verses later he was going to resurrect him, the problem wasn't that Lazarus was gone. He knew exactly where Lazarus was. In fact, he would be back alive again soon. But the issue is death. We know that that was never something intended for us. And God himself, when he came to this earth, wept when he saw what it had done to his formerly perfect creation. So we're grieving with you in that regard. But I am at least grateful that this situation has caused you to ask some very important questions. In fact, the most important question anyone could ever ask. Is there life after death? Since death is all of our problems, it's certainly a question we want answered. Now, as far as your own experience, understand that that's not very uncommon. I've had experiences of my own. At a very young age, I suffocated under a blanket and had to be revived. I can report even less than you in that regard. I didn't really have any sort of afterlife experience either. Likewise, there's other people who claim afterlife experiences and claim to see Shiva or Krishna or any of these other vague concepts. People who have written books and made movies off of verifiably false and unbiblical concepts that have been examined and proven false years later. But this is all talking about our own experiences, and those can only be trusted as far as the individual is concerned. Let me tell you about another experience that was had not by one, not by five, not by 50, but 500 people at the same time, who all witnessed a man die, get buried, stay dead for 3 days, and then resurrect himself, catch this, as that man himself predicted would happen many times during his lifetime. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, is in fact a part of a letter that Paul the Apostle wrote to the Corinthian church. But this was actually a reminder to them of something that they had known for years, even years before Paul became a Christian. So this is, and even according to atheist scholars, one of the earliest creeds, a short little stanza, so to speak, of what Christians were singing to each other and reciting, even though most of them couldn't read or write, since the majority of early Christians were slaves in the Roman Empire. They were able to remember song lyrics in the same way that you and I could, even before we were literate. And even if we still weren't literate today, doesn't mean we're dumb, it just means that we have a different method of learning. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 3 says, "For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures." Great, we all die. "But that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures." Interesting claim. But then it says he was seen by Cephas, one person, maybe he hallucinated, then by the 12. Oh, that throws out that theory. Hallucinations don't happen in groups. Then he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, some of which remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep, referring to some of them had died. So we have massive groups of people all seeing, interacting with, and touching Jesus, knowing that he wasn't just appearing to them, he was physically there with them, even after his confirmed death. Now this is where it gets really fun. After that, he was seen by James, then by all the apostles, and last of all, he was seen by me also, Paul speaking, as one born out of due time. Understand that James was the biological little brother of Jesus. When Jesus was born from Mary, who was a virgin at the time that she conceived Jesus, when he was born, Joseph and Mary then went on to have kids, a normal family. And could you imagine being the little brother of God himself? It's no wonder that James didn't believe anything Jesus had to say about him being God come to this earth to be the fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies, because you yourself know you don't listen to your big brother about anything, at least not while he's here. But if your brother Jonathan had come back to life, suddenly you'd start rethinking a lot of the stuff he was telling you during his lifetime if he made the same kind of claims Jesus did, wouldn't you? And understand that's the key in this, because James wasn't just the kind of person who was like the other disciples. He didn't believe Jesus was God until he saw him risen from the dead. And likewise, Paul, he wasn't even anything close to what you can consider a relationship with Jesus. He was a murderer of Christians. He thought they were all misguided followers of a false religion, and he would personally dedicate himself to what you could essentially call ISIS for Judaism. He would see them all wiped off the face of the earth and think he was doing God a favor until he met Jesus after he had his death confirmed. So we're not just talking about some individual's experience. We're talking about over 500 people seeing the same thing at once. And what was that thing? That a man was confirmed dead for 3 days, confirmed as such. And how did he die again? A full Roman crucifixion. Not just being nailed to a cross, but everything in between. And when you went through that kind of experience, we have no record of anyone in history ever walking away from such an ordeal as that. And yet, after his confirmed death by over a dozen eyewitnesses, as was required in Roman history, we saw that Jesus not only appeared to his disciples, but interacted with them, touched them, and confirmed to them these words, "Because I live, you will live also." Now understand why this is important for you and I, Jonathan, and why it's also important to not neglect going to church. Yes, there are people who go to church who wouldn't know the Bible from a phone book and are quite frankly some of the more unpleasant individuals that you wouldn't even find among secular institutions. You'd find more decent people in a bar. But understand as well, there are also people there, like myself, like those who care about you, who want to remind you of the most important fact in history, that Jesus didn't just say he was God and died like everyone else. He proved he was God through words and deeds, especially a confirmed resurrection from the dead. And by his experience, by his example, by his reality that he has given a witness of us to in history, that we have the hope that his experience lines up with fact. Because you and I, we may have clinically died, but we didn't stay dead. Jesus was confirmed dead, brutalized beyond all human comprehension, and then came back to prove that anyone who follows his words, the same words that said, "I will die and in 3 days will be raised," also said, "He who believes in me will live, even if he dies." So do we know there is life after death? Yes, because Jesus himself bore direct witness and first-hand experience to that fact through his resurrection from the dead. And secondly, is neglecting church a good idea? Well, the book of Hebrews recommends that is not the approach we want to take to the Christian life, because these are the kind of people you need reminding you of this fact. Because we can all have our own experiences. We can be manipulated and deceived. We can end up following dreams, oxygen-deprived hallucinations even, and forget historical fact. That God is real, has revealed himself in history, and now offers you the same hope that I know that your brother would want you to have as well. Thank you for sending in your question. I look forward to answering more in the future. Remember that fact, that God is real, God is risen, and he wants a relationship with you.